What does this visual tell you? What's your first impression? Now, study it for a moment. Write down what you think is the most prominent message in this visual. How about this one? Take a moment to review it. Now, what's its most prominent message? Now, this one. Would you believe that it's the same information? That's right, it contains the same data. You, the designer, control how people see things. Did you ever think about how important it is that you design that visual ethically? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this unit. One of the most important elements of creating visuals is to ensure that you do so ethically. What does it mean to be ethical? Let's figure that out by reading a definition of ethics. Ethics attempts to study concepts surrounding human actions in terms of what is proper or right, or what is improper or wrong. Being ethical means we want to do what is right or fair, so that we think and act in a way that we believe will help us do this. That means that when designing visuals, we want to ensure that they reflect the truth and that they can be interpreted easily and correctly by our entire audience of viewers. In other words, we designers have an ethical obligation to not mislead our audience. Or, to put it another way, we are ethically obligated to lead our audience as best we can to an honest conclusion. Let's review some ways that we can make sure we do this. Here are 3 simple things that will help you focus on the ethical elements of your visual. To design with ethics in mind, remember to use good data. Design the visual fairly, and give credit where credit is due. If you're presenting data in your visual, make sure that the data is valid. By that we mean make sure that it's current, not outdated, and make sure that it's from a reputable source. Let's take a closer look at each of these. In the book, The Wall Street Journal Guide to Information Graphics, The Do's and Don'ts of Presenting Data, Facts, and Figures, author Donna Wong reminds us that when designing a chart, quote, one single wrong data point can discredit the rest of the information and make the entire chart worthless. That means you need good data to start with. She also reminds us to verify our data with additional sources and consult with experts if we see outliers or questionable data. For any visual, we want to use reliable data sources to develop it. But how do we know a source is reliable? The Purdue Online Writing Lab, called the OWL, shares these questions for determining if a source is reliable. We should ask, who is the author? How recent is the source or sources? What is the author's purpose? And what type of sources does your audience value? The Purdue OWL also warns us to be especially careful when evaluating internet sources. For an excellent summary of these, click on the link to the Purdue OWL site listed below. Our second design principle is design your visuals fairly. What I mean is, you should use the design principles and elements we've presented to create visuals accurately, reliably, and that truthfully communicate the main message. So let's focus on a few of these principles and elements and ensure we are applying them with an ethical as well as an aesthetic focus. Here are 3 ways you can do this. We can choose the right type of visual to convey our message. We can keep our visual clear and uncluttered. And we can frame the information without bias. We've talked about this a bit in other modules, but it's worth repeating. Make sure you choose the right type of visual to convey your message. In our unit on the purpose of our visual, we said that we shouldn't just choose one type of visual over another randomly. We've got to determine the best type for our audience. One that presents the main message clearly to our audience, and that means all of our audience members, not just those to whom we most relate. For example, if I'm illustrating how to drive a car, I need to know if my audiences are in countries that drive on the left side of the road or the right side. Or maybe it's for audiences that drive on both sides. Look at these two presentations of the same information. The table makes our audience work really hard to see that solar profits have more than tripled, while the others have remained relatively the same. That means our audience can misread or misinterpret the information. The bar chart is much easier to read. Also note the two different titles on these charts. The table gives us a very general title, and we really don't know what the main message or main purpose of this visual is. In his books Trees, Maps, and Theorems, Jean-Luc Demas says that the title of any visual, particularly a slide in a presentation, should not just say what the message is. It should answer the question, so what? Remember, the bar chart's title answers that question. It answers the so what. It tells us that solar energy has more than tripled its profits while the others have remained flat. Remember, we said that the Penn State University calls this the assertion evidence approach to slides and labels. Or it's what Jean-Luc Demas said is answering the question, so what? Our next principle of designing fairly is to ensure that we can keep our visuals clean and uncluttered. Remember this chart? I created it right within my PowerPoint software. But if I had used the defaults, it might have looked like this. And all the other elements that I can add, look at that. The point here is keep it simple. As Wong points out in her book, quote, the best chart should be free of any distraction and allow the reader to compare or contrast the data and draw a conclusion. Finally, to design fairly, we must frame the information without bias. Look at our chart. If we were to embellish the message with this visual of the sun, we may be trying to bias our audience towards solar energy just by including an image that focuses on that. It's the same with charts and graphs. We can change the message just by changing the elements, like the scale intervals or the axis reference points. Compare the scale intervals in these two visuals of the same data. In the first, the cooling rate appears slow. In the second, it looks like it's much faster, but it's the same. Our last point in this unit is to make sure we give credit where credit is due. If we use a visual from another source, we must have permission to do so. This may require specific permission from the creator, or it may be that you must just, at the very least, give credit to the source. However, this is not your decision. These are not only ethical decisions, but they're legal decisions too. The law behind much of this is copyright law, and it's complicated and not something we're going to dive into in this course. However, here are some basics that should help you determine the right or ethical path when using visuals. First, if you don't create an image or take the photograph, it's not yours. Someone else owns it, and you need permission to use it. Second, some institutions need only give credit. Why? Part of this comes under the U.S. copyright law regarding fair use. Isaac Kaplan, in the August 4th, 2016 online article entitled Art Copyright Explained, gives a good explanation of this fair use law. He says, the most important question is, are you using the image for commercial purposes? If so, you'll likely be in trouble. Or nonprofit and educational purposes. If so, you are likely to be in the clear. It also depends on the nature of how you're using the copyright work. The less original or less creative your use, the weaker your fair use claim. Another important factor is the total amount of the copyrighted image being reproduced. The more you reproduce, the less likely you are to be protected by fair use. Judges will look at the extent to which that reproduction impacts the market and undermines the economic value of the author's original. Lastly, if the image is being transformed or parodied, it can also be protected under fair use. And ownership of visuals varies from country to country. Know where your sources come from, and then you'll need to work within the laws of that land. Finally, if you use data to create an image, you must determine who owns that data and if you need permission to use it.